We bring insights from global digital dentistry leaders directly to you, helping you stay ahead in this ever-changing field. Milling or printing? From dental Facebook groups to industry headlines, there seems to be endless excitement about 3D printing taking over as the must-have digital dentistry technology of the future. But with all this hype, many clinicians are wondering, is this really spelling the end of in-office milling as we know it? I'm your host, Dr. Ahmad Al-Hassiny, and in this episode dubbed Making Sense of the Hype, the real scoop on 3D printing versus milling, we're going straight to the experts to uncover the facts. We'll be sitting down with Milz from Dentsply Sirona to help us cut through the noise and understand the real differences between printing and milling technologies, when to use each one, and why they continue innovating side by side rather than replacing each other anytime soon. Together, we'll explore questions like, what are the key strengths of 3D printing versus milling when it comes to material capabilities and indications right now? What do real-world usage statistics tell us that the headlines don't about the current dentist and clinician behavior? How do printing and milling complement each other in full digital implant and restorative workflows? And finally, what cutting-edge innovations are happening on both fronts that show neither printing nor milling is stagnating yet? If determining whether to adopt 3D printing or focus your in-office digital investments on milling has you stuck amidst the headlines, this episode delivers the reality check you need. Now, we're very fortunate here to have Milz from Dentsply Sirona join us again. How are you doing, Max?
I'm great. Good to see you, Ahmad.
Yeah, nice to talk to you too. Now, since we've talked, we recently had you on the podcast and we talked about some of the advancements that are happening in DS Core and all the new things that Dentsply Sirona have been up to. Is there any updates or any exciting things that you'd like to share with us before we jump into the topic of today, which is when you should mill and when you should print?
Sounds good. Yeah, we just had Dentsply Sirona World in Las Vegas, and we showcased a bunch of things that are new there. For example, a smile simulator for shore smile aligners. And we also announced, and I think this is kind of the big news in particular regarding milling and printing, is an expansion of our partnership with 3Shape to basically connect Trios with DS Core via 3Shape Unite. And
Awesome.
This will basically also open up printing and milling with Prime Mill and Prime Print to anyone who has a Trios scanner. So I think that's pretty big news, and it also kind of shows that we're true to what we're saying. We're saying we believe in openness and interoperability between platforms rather than, making everything as close as possible.
Yeah, I mean, that is massive news. Traditionally, a lot of people in the market see Dentsply Sirona and 3Shape as almost rivals and competitors. So this is huge, and it must be one of the first times that you really integrate another scanner company into a big part of the companies. Is that true?
Well, we have an existing partnership with 3Shape, right? So we would say, well, yes, it's a rivalry, but there's also partnership. When we look at 3Shape, where they are really strong is, of course, for anything that's lab related, right? And we, of course, are very strong in anything that's chairside related, so milling and printing. So there is, of course, a certain degree of overlap because, of course, people also use a prime scan to send stuff to a lab. But we also believe that so many people have scanners now, why not make it possible for them to also mill and print chairside to open up to that direction, because it's also what customers want, right? I mean, they want flexibility and they want interoperability.
That's huge, and that's huge for DS Core as well. Do you see that becoming something that you do with other leading scanner companies, or is it currently just a partnership with 3Shape?
Right now, it's a partnership with 3Shape, but of course, in the future, it's always possible to expand openness to other manufacturers. I wouldn't limit that necessarily or make it specific to scanners, because, I mean, there are other pieces of equipment. And what we do believe is that people need a platform that connects different pieces. And for us, that's DS Core. And we are the manufacturer that basically has every piece of equipment, right? printers, Milz, intraoral X-ray, extraoral X-ray chairs. So we need to connect the entire breadth of what we offer. And then, of course, people also have equipment from other manufacturers that is good. And of course, we would like to allow dentists to work in a way with the equipment that they have.
That's epic, and certainly exciting times for DS Core. You mentioned at the start something about the aligners and a smile simulator. Is that web-based or is that through a software, or how does that work?
It's a function of DS Core, right? So it just basically shows that any new function that you would expect from Dentsply Sirona software will be in DS Core. So the simulator, if you already have a subscription to DS Core, you basically get that now in addition. And that's the way we see it, is there's more and more functions coming out, and these functions will be in the different subscription tiers that we have. But at this stage, the vast majority of them are in the light tier, which starts at $20 a month. So it's not really a big amount of money. So it's just really new stuff coming in, and you have access to new functions without doing anything. You don't need to install anything. You can just start using it.
It's epic. Amazing stuff. And congratulations on a great event in Las Vegas.
Thank you.
On to the topic of today, because as we mentioned in the first time we talked, and there's so much hype about printing these days, and there's, for better or worse, and obviously Dentsply Sirona are really, like you say, the company that offers every solution in the market. You're in a unique position where you offer a mill, a really good chairside solution, you offer a printer, and really what I wanted to discuss with you is what you see as the future of this 3D printing versus milling debate that's going on. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about what are some of the advancements that are going on. Obviously, you have Primeprint, you've had Prime Mill. Can you share any thoughts about that?
Sure. I'd also be curious about your opinion as the practitioner, right, in terms of how you use the different technologies in your practice. I think, to put that very simply, at this stage, printing is for everything that's temporary and milling is for everything that's permanent. And that's a function of the materials and of the manufacturing process that you're using. So if you think about it, the chairside or in-office printers that people offer today, they print resins, that's DLP. That's essentially plastics, that's polymers, and that comes with some advantages and some disadvantages. And if you compare it to milling, you basically take an existing high-strength material and then you chisel pieces away from it, right? So by nature, it's a different manufacturing process that allows you to take different materials. And I think that's the real underlying fundamental difference between both technologies.
I'm really curious. You guys are like some of the top companies in the world. Do you hear the hype that we hear as clinicians kind of in the trenches? Can you see the hype about 3D printing, or does it come on your desk that there's clinicians that are saying, you know, this is the next best thing and it's going to beat milling in the future? Is that something that comes across to you guys?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely a big hype about 3D printing. A lot of people are excited. I would say it differs still quite a bit between different countries. Some countries are more excited about it and some are more conservative.
Obviously, the lead is the good old United States of America.
Yes, the US is very excited about 3D printing. Germany is a bit more hesitant, and in Japan, it's really early. And it's also interesting then to see what type of technologies get accepted, right? So, for example, Japan has a tradition of very high quality, high regard for safety and security and so forth. And 3D printing before we launched Primeprint was something where people were quite skeptical about in a dental context. And with the entire piece of automation, automatic curing, no resin remnants and so forth, Primeprint, despite being two machines, actually in Japan seems to fit really well because it meets a lot of cultural elements where people say, no, I want to have a proper manufacturing process, I want documentation, I want to make sure that this is as automated as possible, rather than, you know, tinkering around with chemicals and alcohol and fumes and so forth.
You make a really good point. And I think a lot of the time, because we're going to have listeners all around the globe, a lot of the time, dentists, when they, in their own environment, in their own countries, they they tend to forget that the globe is a big place and there's a lot of different cultures and what's acceptable, what's not. I mean, obviously, some are really loud on social media and they can drown out everyone else, but there's a lot of dentists in the world. It's interesting. I want to take us back to that point you made about resins being plastic. And so, in your eyes, do you ever see that manufacturers are basically putting more and more fillers into these resins to try and make them strong enough? Do you ever see that getting to a point where it's, golden goose of a material or some magic bullet? I always reflect on when Emax was released. That kind of changed the game and completely changed dentistry, or similar PFM from metal crowns and so forth. So do you ever see resin crowns doing that, or do you just think that it's just material science, there is a limit to what you can do with resins?
Well, first of all, I think there's still a lot of runway in innovating material science, right? Also when it comes to plastics, and in particular in 3D printing. Now, I think DLP deposits resins to a certain extent, right? So the more ceramic filler content you add, the more difficult it gets to deposit it. I think that's just a limitation of the DLP technology per se. Now, there are, of course, many other 3D printing technologies, right? I mean, you have laser sintering, you can do titanium with a laser sintering machine. They come with other downsides. If you would put a laser sintering machine into a dental practice, you'd not be talking about a couple of $10,000, but you'd be talking hundreds of thousands, because these are big, expensive, and slow machines, right? Because then you basically have a bed of essentially metal powder that gets sintered by a laser, right? So it's a completely different process to 3D print. So I think there's a lot of exciting technology that can still come, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a trade-off of how economic is it to deploy it in a dental practice. And I think when we think about the hype of 3D printing, we always have to think about, well, there's 3D printing in practice, and then there's 3D printing in the labs, or even in the liner manufacturing, right? I mean, there is 3D printing in the background. It's too simple to just say 3D printing is the future and then mix everything together. When we're talking about 3D printing in office, it's a question on which materials, which technology, and what's the cost of the machine, right? Because a lot of the hype and the uptake is also because printers are pretty cheap if you want to get into 3D printing. So the adoption hurdle is lower than for other technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that's part of the reason why there's so much hype, is because a milling machine is oftentimes double or maybe triple, 4 times the price of a printer. And that's why so many people are so excited to get into it, because it seems like a low-cost option. I mean, look, you asked me before, as a clinician, what do I use printers for? I've used over 9-10 printers in my office. Obviously, through IDD, I'm testing these machines significantly and all the time. I would say I've used printers for every indication. I mean, for those of you listening out there who don't really understand what a printer is used for in the clinic, it's quite simple. Models, splints or night guards, surgical guides, restorations of all forms, whether that's veneers or crowns or inlays, onlays, etc. Those are probably the most common ones. And then there's like the aligner manufacturing, which is, I think, quite niche and a lab-based kind of manufacturing process. I can't see many clinicians printing aligners, frankly, given the labor involved. But obviously, models, it's a no-brainer. I think every clinician who's digitized almost needs a printer, because if you think about it, a clinic used to have a stone room at the back of the clinic where they can pour up models. But now if you have a scanner, how do you make those models if you need them? So models is a no-brainer, and I think all the discussion goes around restorations. In my opinion, restorations that are printed are still, like you say, long-term temps, or in my practice, what they would do is replace direct composites. Have you heard of this ideology? What do you think about that, using a printer to replace your composite restorations?
I think that's probably the edge of where the two technologies meet, because I mean, there are also composite materials in Milz, right?
Very true. A lot of them, and they've been well established.
Exactly. I think if you compare the strength and the aesthetic choices you have, I don't see printed crowns replacing that completely, to be honest, because it's not just about can you print a crown or not. It's, do you have the right shade of color? Then the question is, if you want to have a printer only prints at this point one color, right? With blocks, you have the flexibility, you have a full range of different colors. Now, of course, you could also have a full range of different resins, but resins also have a certain shelf life, right? So if you buy 10 different bottles and you don't print a whole lot, you might end up throwing away some of the resin. And then it's a question again, did it really pay off? So I think the touching point between the two technologies is probably composite crowns, but even there, it's not just about replacing it. There was an interesting study by an investment bank called Stifel, and they basically asked dentists, do they see printing and milling as complementary or cannibalistic? Only 10% said it's cannibalistic, 50% said it's complementary, and 40% say it's neither nor. So what you said as a practitioner as well is what everybody else is saying, right? So if you think about the two technologies coming together, and that's also why we believe, for example, in our case, Primeprint and Primemill are a great combo, is if you think about a treatment, you need different steps, right? So for example, if you take an implant procedure, you might print the surgical guide, and then you might print a temporary crown, and then you would mill the permanent crown. So it's actually bringing the complete process in-house into the dental practice. And if you would look at other procedures, you might do a restoration with a veneer, and then you might protect that smile with a night guard, right? So the veneer might be milled, and then the night guard obviously would be printed. So I think it's more about, think about the procedure, the benefit to the patient that you're trying to offer, and which technology adds what, and how do you bring them together?
I totally agree, and I think you've said it beautifully in that they're totally complementary. And I think especially in the lab side, most labs already do this. Most labs have mills and printers. It's only really the clinicians who are having this big fight about which one beats the other. But what are your thoughts about indirect printables? Do you have any thoughts about replacing inlays and onlays with printable resins? I mean, I guess you already answered it in that we have good composite blocks already. Do you think a composite block is better than a resin in terms of longevity?
I think at this stage, there's not enough clinical evidence to give a definitive answer. So right now, I would say there's great clinical evidence for milled materials and limited evidence on printed permanent materials. Now, inlays and onlays are obviously, since they're not replacing a complete tooth, I think there the potential is higher. But it's also always good to look at the numbers. I liked what you said at the beginning, what people do with a printer. If you look at any study, or also our internal statistics, what do people actually do with a printer?
Print models.
Models is the single biggest thing people do, followed by surgical guides, followed by night guards. Everything else is far, far away. And if you look at mills, what do people do on a mill? It's crowns, 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 crowns. And
single
then,
crowns. Single one tooth crowned.
Exactly. And then you have inlays and onlays, and you have veneers and so forth. But if you look at what's the main use case, milling is about crowns, and printing is, if you want to be weirdly simplistic, is about models. And of course, also surgical guides and night guards. But it's pretty clear when you look at what people actually do with the technology.
And I guess that's almost hilarious to me, because obviously big companies like you and Dentsply Sirona, you would have the actual data versus what goes on social media. I do wonder sometimes if you guys almost laugh at the debates that go on that are so disconnected from what the real normal dentist or average dentist does. There's so many debates now about beating zirconia, beating EMAX with resins. And it's like you say, most people are just not printing these things. It's not the common reason.
I would say, first of all, we monitor this debate very closely, right? And of course, we also look into advancements in material science. And if someone can push the envelope, that's great, right? And then the question is, for us, as a long-standing manufacturer, is we want to make sure that people do something that's clinically proven. We hold ourselves to a high standard to say, hey, look, we're not going to do something that we're not convinced of. And if you think about milling and printing, the great thing is that we have both. And the great thing is that they also play together. And that's, again, where for us DS Core comes into play. Because if you think about the printing process, what do you need to print and to mill? there are two things you always need. The one thing is a scanner. The second thing is a design software. And then it's really about, does this design now go to a printer or does it go into a mill? So there also is a synergy between both technologies by looking at the front end of the process. And I think the main thing that I would look at is always rather the economics. At the end of the day, a dental practice needs to have positive economics in what they're doing. And very often we tend to forget the labor. And the labor is the most expensive thing a dental practice has. So for us, it's really thinking about whether you mill or you print, how do you make that as economically beneficial to a practice? And that means automating as much as possible, making it as efficient as possible, because a cheaper printer that you pay for with more labor is a losing proposition.
Totally. And look, if there's any evidence of that kind of efficiency, it's obviously the CEREC system, which is by far the best, in my opinion at least, chairside system that you can buy for milling. It's just so easy, so simple. I use it all the time. I have access to different scanners, but I'm always using CEREC. That's always my go-to if I want to do a same-day crown. It just works and it's easy and I can delegate it. I am curious though, again, it just comes back to that discussion that because of the cost, dentists are just not buying mills. As much as we want to say that the mill is better than the printer, they're just not buying them. I don't know if you can share any statistics. I would be really interested, but feel free not to answer this question. Do you know what roughly the percentage of dentists that mill in houses? A really rough figure?
Yeah, so it depends by country.
Of course.
But it's 10 to 20% of dentists mill in-house. So that means just looking at how many people could be milling, there's still 80 to 90% of dentists that are not doing that yet. And while we see that there's a lot of hype and fast growth in printing, we do see still pretty strong demand for milling as well. Because again, it comes down to economics, and both types of machines give you a great return on investment. It's typically 2 to 3 years. And then both of these things are money makers for a dental practice. So it's interesting to always see that debate. Oh, do I do milling or printing? It's no, you should do both. If you really want to have a successful, profitable practice, it's not a question of either or. It's a question of and.
100%. And I love what you just said. It's something that I say in my lectures all the time. My CEREC system is a money printing machine. That's really what I say about it. I mean, once it's paid off, there's just so many benefits of being able to produce something in-house.
Let me just add one thing on adoption, right? So if you think about the adoption of milling, CEREC is now 35 years old, right? The adoption was slow at the beginning because the technology, of course, at the beginning was also in its infancy. But what people underestimate is that what brought scanning into the practice was CEREC, right? We invented scanning, and the first reason to get a scanner was to do chairside dentistry. And now you have almost a second stage where you have almost a decoupling of scanning and milling and printing. Because a dental practice without a scanner at some point is going to disappear. It's going to be a tool that every dentist has. Since you're not radiating people, it's basically possible to scan any patient anytime. Now, if everybody already has a scanner,
what's next?
Then it becomes so much easier to take the step into milling and printing in your practice because you've already gone half the way, right? Because there's always a big fear of, oh, do I want to integrate digital workflows into my practice? We've already done half the way. So if you're comfortable scanning and doing some of the design work, maybe playing around with it somewhat, and then with the advances that you get, AI crowns and so forth in the future, then putting a mill in there is a logical next step. So we believe actually that the high adoption of scanners and the possibility to have AI at scale in the cloud helps the adoption of mills as much as it helps the adoption of printers.
I 100% agree. And it's like you said, everything's been decoupled. Everyone rushed out to buy scanners. In some markets, it's as high as 50% in dental clinics. And yeah, a lot of dentists are now sitting, after they master scanning and they're comfortable with it, they kind of think about the next step in their digital dentistry journey. And oftentimes that's either a milling machine or a printer. And I guess purely because of the price tag, this is why there's so much hype in printing, because they just seem cheaper. I know people don't quite think of the economics fully, but they are much cheaper than milling machines. The materials, you see people say you can print a crown for $2, so the materials are much cheaper, etc., etc. Do you feel milling has stagnated a little bit? Do you feel like we reached a technological ceiling with milling? Like for the longest time now, I would say at least in the past 5 years, we really haven't seen a wow moment in milling, in my opinion. And look, apart from fast zirconia milling, which was very nice in the prime mill, I feel like the materials are all basically similar. We're just getting more and more composite blocks. We're getting more and more silicate ceramics. Zirconia is getting prettier. But milling machines as a whole, you don't really see a brand new milling machine that does something new. Do you think that ceiling has been reached, or do you see something that could improve milling?
I think there are still technologies that will make milling better. And I would look at the complete workflow of milling rather than just what the mill can do, right? So take, for example, I think one of the barriers why people don't adopt milling is because they don't want to learn design software.
100%.
If you automate designs, you're taking away a barrier to adopt milling, right? So that's one of the topics. The second thing is, where can you actually see all your milling jobs? Are they also available in your practice? Is it integrated more closely with your PMS, with your entire workflow? Where are the inefficiencies in the process? So I think it's rather, if you look at the complete process, which inefficiencies can you take out that lead up to what the mill does, right? Because the mill itself, yes, there's still advancements in materials and how fast can you mill and what materials can you mill and so forth. But I think you always have to look at the complete workflow. And the big blocking point for milling is rather that people are not comfortable in learning design software. I mean, most dentists don't go into dentistry because they want to play with computer programs.
100%. Yeah, they're super intimidated by it as well, in my experience. There's a real barrier there, not just because of cost, because the average dentist doesn't even know what the cost of a CAD software is, but it's that intimidation of having to be a technician.
Exactly. And that comes back to basically instilling confidence, right? So when we talk about crowns, you can have confidence in a milled crown because it's been in the market for 35 years. It's proven clinically. You have lifetimes of 10 or more years. And 3D printing of crowns is something where it's just still relatively new. If you want to be confident in chairside manufacturing, whether it's milling and printing, I'd always opt for something which has been established for longer first.
100%. And that's not to say it may change in the future, right? But I totally agree. And this is why any of my permanent crowns, I'm still milling them purely because, look, I've done a number of printed crowns and just for testing purposes, etc., etc. And it's like you say, there's just this unknown. Will this last? Whereas if I mill a silicate ceramic and I bond it on, I know this will last 10 years easily if I did everything correct. Whereas with these printables, it's funny now we're starting to get people post online what they're starting to see after 2 years, a short 2 years. A lot of these printable resins, you're starting to see a lot of wear. You're starting to see a lot of staining. I mean, I don't know why we forgot that these are just resins at the end of the day.
It's a little bit like if you have a plastic toy or a metal toy, the plastic toy is going to break faster. I mean, it's a question of the material properties. Like, I think there's one interesting thing though about milling, right? Besides all the hype of 3D printing, I actually believe that the hype in 3D printing will help milling. And I tell you why. Now, if you think about the digital workflow and you say, okay, I've mastered scanning, printing is a low entry barrier, it's relatively cheap to get into printing, you feel comfortable with designing with a printer and having chairside manufacturing in your practice with a printer, then to say, well, no, I realize actually I could also do milling because I was able to do all the other stuff. So it actually lowers the barrier.
It's like a stepping stone.
Yes. I think printing is probably the stepping stone for milling for many people.
I guess for CEREC then and Dentsply Sirona, you guys are obviously very well aware of the market. It's not like you have your head in the sand and you see what's going on around you and you see which scanners are being sold and how the scanner only market is taking off. Do you ever see a more open integration with the CEREC mills? I always say it, the CEREC mills are the best chairside mills in the industry. And I wish in some way or form CEREC itself, CEREC Chairside, would open up. But I know, look, that is your competitive edge. But do you see that landscape changing, or will it always be through InLab? Because I've used InLab and I've used CEREC Chairside, and I'm sure you agree, Max, they're two different beasts. CEREC Chairside is like an efficient German engine that just click, 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 5 clicks, you're done. Whereas InLab feels like a lab software. You have to import it, orientate the model. It's not the same experience. Is that always going to be the case?
Let's take one step at a time. That's the way I would see it. I think the first thing is, if you want to really do single visit dentistry, yes, you're right. I mean, CEREC is CEREC. Now, nonetheless, with the 3Shape partnership, we will make the InLab workflow better, and the mill is the same mill, right? So the Prime mill, whether it's a CEREC Prime mill with the CEREC software or an InLab Prime mill, still the same mill. Now, as we further develop DS Core, of course, at some point, the design part of CEREC and InLab will become a part of DS Core completely.
That'd be incredible. That'd be mind-blowing.
Right, and once we reach that state, we're not just taking CEREC or InLab and then dropping it in the cloud. We're actually looking into what's the next generation of it, right? And that's a stepwise process. And whether that full design workflow is then also open to other scanners, that's, I think, a discussion that we'll have in the process of when we get there to have the software completely in the cloud.
That's incredible. And that's incredible to think. I'm super excited. It just makes sense with how many different scanners are out there on the market, and more scanners keep coming out. You would have to be able to offer the amazing CEREC workflow to these people.
Yeah, and I think we want to make sure, besides company strategy and so forth, there's also an obligation we have to make sure that it's a validated good workflow. Because not all scanners are the same, right? I mean, you do all these comparisons of scanners, and a lot of scanners are pretty good. But then the accuracy you need for chairside dentistry puts a premium of what kind of scanner you need. So we also don't believe that any scanner from any manufacturer would be able to deliver on the promise that you have the same awesome CEREC experience, because it's really the interplay of a top-notch scanner with a high data density, the design software, and then the integration with the mill and the oven. So I think it's really that complete workflow.
And so again, on the milling point of view, I know you mentioned that there's developments happening, especially in the AI space and the design space. But I want to take us back for a second to milling materials and milling itself. Do you see much improvement to be had with a milling machine? Because if you think about MCXL to Prime mill, it wasn't a massive jump. We got the zirconia milling faster, which is amazing. But I mean, for glass ceramics, it's relatively the same. Obviously, the Prime mill looks a lot better. It's more modern. As a company, when you're thinking about what's the next milling machine we're going to release within the next 5 to 10 years, do you feel like there's some technological ceiling? You just can't make milling faster. It's just, this is it.
But I think in terms of the speed, you probably reach diminishing returns at some point, right? Because, I mean, does it really matter whether it takes 5 minutes to mill the ground or 4 minutes and 30 seconds? It doesn't, right? You're already in the optimal space. I think it's the innovations will rather be, again, on the ease of workflows, the documentation, the consistency, which materials you're going to put in there that give you more aesthetic options and so forth. I think it's more those topics.
Do you think material science in the milling space has stagnated a bit? I just comparing to resins, the topic is milling and printing. With resins, every month there's a new resin. And I know there are tweaks and there's a lot of OEM products, but there's so much research and development and improvement going on in the resin space. Whereas in milling, you just don't seem to see or hear that as much.
I think when a technology is very young, like printing, you're still in an early level of performance optimization. And With milling, which has a much longer history, obviously the big breakthrough advancements become rarer. That doesn't mean they don't happen, but you're not going to have them on a yearly or even monthly basis. To be honest, and that's part of the reason why, when we think about confidence and consistent patient results, that's why milling is the go-to thing for permanent things, right? But if you then look at printing, there needs to be more innovation to get to better results. Printing is not yet, in terms of maturity, at the same level as milling. It's
No,
great. It's excellent for many use cases. I'm a big fan of 3D printing, and not just DLP, but also the other applications outside of dental. But there's also still more advancement that has to happen.
all your points are bang on. I totally agree, and it totally makes sense. I mean, this is why we are so confident in milling, because it's tried and tested, literally. We've been there, done that. We made all the mistakes. Some things come to mind, like when we were all placing lava crowns and that didn't work out too well. And even some closer to home, like Saltra Duo, we learned, we moved forward. And printing is still seems to be quite experimental. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it's still at the stage where there is experimentation, right? And I think when people want to get into new technologies, that's part of the risk, right? I mean, there's still experimentation happening. I think things will go wrong in 3D printing over the next years. And as an industry, I think we'll learn how to make it better. But that comes back to the point about confidence. And that's why when you're doing something new, maybe start with the things which are easier. Something which is temporary is less risk because it's temporary, right? Something which is permanent should stand the test of time.
Very true. And to kind of conclude the session in terms of printing itself, what are some of the exciting things happening in the Primeprint space? Is there anything you can share? I mean, you guys have a resin for every indication now, from my understanding. You released Lucitone, you released a softer splint material, as many people complain about the hard splints across the whole industry, not just with Primeprint. Is there anything that you see that is exciting in the printing space? Is it just restoration? That seems to be the thing that is capturing everyone's attention, and everyone just talks about restorations. But is there anything else that's coming, do you think, in the printing space? Or
Well, I think the main thing, as you rightly pointed out, is about resins, right? More resins gives you more indications. I think why is there so much discussion about restorations is because it's the bread and butter of dentistry, right? I mean, if you think about it, that's one of the biggest oral health problems there is. So I think when it comes to 3D printing, it always is a question on, as you now go into more and more and more indications and you bring out more and more resins, of course you're going into the long tail, right? Because the big topics are always going to be models, surgical guides, splints, and so forth. So I think the thing that I would be most excited about over the next years is if we truly get to multicolor printing in the dental practice. Because if you get to multicolor printing, then you can do different things. Today, one resin, one color, one material property, right? So if you would get to multicolor or multi-resin printing, then of course that would open up additional pieces, right? Like think about dentures today. For dentures, you still have to print not just one piece, but several pieces, then you have to put them together, right?
how resin is, it's monolithic. I mean, some companies are trying to do that, of course. I mean, that's a whole different printing technology, like Stratasys with their printers, but they don't really be interested in Chairside at all, really. They're just a lab-focused company.
And I think for 3D printing, the big thing is what will happen in the lab space first. Because labs make the majority of anything that dental practices consume. Chairside milling and chairside printing is great, but if we say, let's take an advanced market where maybe 20% of people mill, that means 80% of people mill by the lab, right?
Yeah.
And if for printing the adoption rate is lower than milling, but we know, of course, labs have 3D printers already for a long time. So it's really look at what happens in the lab space. And then for what happens in the office, it's always a question on, can you make it small enough and can you make it cheap enough to be affordable for a dental practice? Because that becomes a question of throughput at the end of the day. If you have large volumes and you have a large space and you can put a large machine, then the investment case for a large machine is different than if you also have to fit it into a small practice where space is a premium, rent is a big expense.
Ventilation and all these issues and toxic chemicals.
Yeah, and that's, I think, if I have a final thought there, right? People need to look at the complete cost of a printing solution. The great thing about Primeprint is you don't need an external suction unit, so you don't have to worry about fumes. You don't have to worry about handling chemicals. It's very easy plug and play, right? And then if you think about most of the other printers, you better have a suction unit installed where the printer is, because there will be chemical fumes. And that's something that you have to then buy in addition. The other thing is there a design software included in the printer? With Primeprint, there is. If you buy most of the other printers, you'll still need to get yourself a design software for a couple of $1,000s, right? So it's always a question on, think about the complete system costs and the operating costs of the solution you're going for, rather than just looking at this machine costs this much and this machine costs this much.
I totally agree. And I think that's been a huge strength of Dentsply Sirona, especially with the CEREC Chairside system. It's always been about the whole workflow. This has never been about one piece or just the scan or just the mill. It's always been the workflow, start to finish. Look, it's been a great discussion, Max. Any final words for those who are listening and thinking about printing or milling? Any kind of pieces of advice or even pearls of wisdom that you can share with us?
The first thing I would say is listen to the Institute of Digital Dentistry, because you guys are doing great work. The second thing, it's really about get hands-on. Get demos and really try it out. There is no better way to figure out whether milling or printing is for you than to actually do a hands-on course to see how does it work? Can I integrate this into my practice? Will I be able to train my staff and win them over to do it? And will I be able to really get the economics that both systems offer? There's no substitute for getting hands-on.
I 100% agree. And I always tell that to people, actually. Even when they're asking me all the time, which scanner should I buy? I just tell them, go to expos and try them. You have to try before you buy, because you can't just go off Facebook groups or this guy did it or this looks like a really good workflow on Instagram. You really have to look at the whole workflow start to finish and really understand it. That's one thing about printing I genuinely don't think people appreciate is all the little steps and the labor involved. It's not hard. You can delegate it, but it's not like this printer magically makes you a crown. There's a lot of steps, and even online I'm seeing a lot of, I would say, optimistic numbers about how fast you can print a crown.
I think in terms of, can you print several crowns at the same time in a printer? Of course you can. But then the question is, do you have several patients in the room that need a temporary crown right now?
How many people are doing full mouth rehabs? Like the reality, how many people are doing full mouth rehabs versus the people doing a single crown?
Fully agree with you.
Look, it's been a great chat. I really appreciate your time, Max. For those of you who are listening, Max is the Group Vice President for Connected Technology Solutions at Dentsply Sirona. So we're very fortunate to have him on the podcast. I appreciate your time, my friend. And look, we might catch up again in a couple of months and have another chat and see what Dentsply is up to and how DS Core's going.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Ahmad.
My pleasure. Thank you, mate. See you guys. That's it for this month's episode of Digital Dentistry Decoded. Thanks so much for listening. And thank you to my guest, Max Milz from Dentsply Sirona, for joining me today. If you enjoyed the show, remember to take a moment to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to sign up to our free digital dentistry courses at instituteofdigitaldentistry.com and follow us on your favorite podcast app so you can listen to our next episode. Coming up next, we have a forward-focused discussion on how artificial intelligence is set to revolutionize digital dentistry. We'll be speaking with ImagoWorks CEO Kevin Kim about the innovations they are pioneering through AI-powered solutions like DentBird. For those of you who haven't heard about DentBird, it is basically AI-driven CAD, similar to 3Shape Automate. In the next episode, we'll explore the monumental impacts AI and automation have had and will have in transforming dental practices, from improved design workflows to enhanced efficiency. Kevin will reveal how AI cloud platforms are accelerating digital care and debunk myths about AI threatening the roles of professionals. You won't want to miss these exclusive insights into understanding AI's impact on digital dentistry. The digital dentistry revolution continues, and we're here to keep you at the forefront at the Institute of Digital Dentistry. You've been listening to Digital Dentistry Decoded. I'm Dr. Ahmad Al-Hassiny, helping you stay ahead of the curve in this dynamic world of digital dentistry. Thanks for listening.